Welcome to The Backstory. I'm your host, Anne Hancock Toomey. Over the course of my career, I've had the privilege to work with and learn from and guide some incredible leaders, mostly in healthcare, but not always. The Backstory is a chance for me to talk to some of them, unpack who they are and where they came from, and how it all influences who they are today and how they lead. Ultimately, each conversation offers a case study in what I'm calling authentic leadership. Let me now invite you into our conversation for the real backstory. Today, I have the great pleasure of spending time with Tim Johnsen, a truly seasoned health system executive and currently COO of Presbyterian Healthcare Services, the largest health system and health plan in New Mexico. Tim is someone I've known for a long time, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to pick his brain today on leadership. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thanks so much, Anne. I'm really excited to be here.
Tim and I worked together for many years, right? Dating back to your time with Mercy Health and then Integris in Oklahoma and now Presbyterian. And I just cherish our partnership and our friendship so much.
Likewise.
Really grateful to spend time with you today. What you may not know that has long stuck with me, Tim, is that you were one of the first CEOs that I worked with who really believed in and led with the power of communication and responsible transparency. I remember that you used to send, now this is in the Wayback Machine, so this would have been back when you were with Mercy as CEO of a hospital with them. You used to send a Sunday email every week to all of your employees and physicians, sharing what was on your mind, answering questions that you had heard or received. You would highlight acts of good that you saw across the system, and they came to count on it, like to look for it. It was simple and so powerful because it was real and you were consistent. Do you remember that?
I do remember it, and I'm shocked that you do. You can't over-communicate, right? And it did become a really good forum, and obviously we were going through change at that time, like the rest of my career in healthcare, but that consistent voice and knowing that whatever it is, whatever rumor's gonna be, I just felt that it was my responsibility to just keep that communication line very open.
And Tim, as this is a podcast about strong leaders who are inspiring and who get results because of who they are and the environment that they create for others. I think you're a card-carrying member of that club. So there's a lot to learn from your career and your life journey. And if you're ready, we'll dig in.
That sounds great. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's start from the beginning. I know you're a Midwesterner. Tell me about where you're from and how you grew up.
Grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. You would think naturally a city boy, I guess, but I feel like a country boy because my dad had grown up in the country and he bought a cabin when I was about 5 years old that was about 100 miles south of St. Louis. So every Friday, right after he got off work, we would head down to the cabin and hunt and fish and hang out in the woods, literally probably 47, 48 weekends out of the year. So
do you still need that kind of dose of nature? And
I do. It's really funny. Kind of lost touch of that and forgotten it because he fired me as a hunter when I was 13. I'm pretty noisy, and to be a deer hunter, you have to sit very silently and quietly. If I would get cold, I would build a fire. That's not good. Deer don't come up to that. So he fired me at age 13. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, my chief medical officer at Integris actually just kept after me to go do this little climb called Mount Kilimanjaro. And I brought my son along with me. The third day, I just realized how much I missed nature, how much I had missed the quietness and just being out there. Obviously, no cell service, all that. And I had this very interesting feeling in my neck and shoulders. And I realized, oh, there's no stress there. That actually got me reconnected to make sure that I do get out in nature more often than once every 10 years now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Clearly, your first job was not a hunting or fishing guide. What was your first job?
My first job was very interesting. So I grew up going to a Catholic grade school. And in the 6th grade, I got a great opportunity. So Sister Mary Jane, she taught guitar lessons after school on Wednesdays, and she decided to hand that over to me to teach those classes every week. And I'd only played for a couple of years, but I came from a very musical family. For whatever reason, she hired me, for lack of a better word, and I got $1 from each student for that half-hour session every Wednesday. It is funny because you think that's just not much or silly, but I had to prepare what songs we were going to learn. Obviously, it was a lot of Catholic hymns. She would also bring in some pop, like current pop stuff at the time. But yeah, that was it. Suddenly you're sitting around with 10 or 12 of your classmates and you're teaching them something in the sixth grade. So it was wild.
That's fascinating. I haven't heard that one before. That's a really good first job. Okay,
It
what is one thing you learned from it, especially considering you're teaching your peers at that time?
Yeah, I think that's it, right? That you've got people that are picking on you at lunchtime and then other people that are your best friends in the lunch line, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, kind of you're in charge for that 30 minutes after school. And so adapting to that, you hate to think that's early formative leadership, but maybe it was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Who is the first leader that you can remember who impacted you in a positive way?
So then my illustrious career, I moved to Dairy Queen, and that leader was not motivational.
So maybe didn't impact you in a positive way. What did you
Right.
learn? What was your
Um,
experience?
I learned how to make the little curly Q on top. Learned how to make a lot of banana splits when they would have sales. Other than that, I learned what not to do as a leader. He was terrible, right? And I've always said through my career, you learn as much from bad leaders as you do from good leaders, right? I will
You
never
do.
do this type of behavior.
Right.
But I moved on to a restaurant, and the manager there, Bill Dagonia was his name. He was just fantastic. It was a large restaurant, family restaurant in St. Louis. I was hired on as a busboy. I may have told them that I was 16 when I was 15 and started working there. And literally within 3 or 4 weeks, like he was pulling me aside and telling me this and telling me that about just the operations and how things go and how he's going to talk to this person and that person. But the main thing that stuck with me with him was that he led what he called a pre-meal on the big days, on Fridays and Saturday nights at 5 p.m., would pull everybody together. And he was tough in terms of cleanliness, high service expectations, and yet he was very funny. He would set up kind of some spontaneous contest on who could sell the most margaritas that night or whatever it might be, so you could earn extra money. But it was a very good, again, someone to look to say, this is a cool way to lead, because he really did pull everybody together. We were all laughing, and yet also understood the seriousness and the expectations that he had for how the evening was going to go.
And have you carried some of those things forward to your own leadership style today?
I don't offer margarita sales.
No?
But yeah, I think so. I think motivating a team, pulling people
Right.
together, talking with them and not at them, and what barriers do we have ahead of us for this big challenge ahead for the next evening or for that evening. So yeah, I absolutely think so. My wife, my now wife, she was not my wife then. She started working there too, and about every year or two, it seems like we'll have a good discussion about Bill Dagonia for sure.
That's terrific. All right, as you think back to growing up or beyond, what's the best, most memorable piece of advice that your dad or your parents, someone in your family gave you?
Yeah, I got a couple, and it's a little morbid in how it came across. My dad had a really good sense of humor. Literally, at the age of 12 or 13, probably the same weekend I was fired for hunting. He would if we were driving, he would slow down by a cemetery, and I'm just like, "What's up? What are we doing? Do we have a relative here?" And he would pull over on the side of the road, and he would just say, "That place is full of indispensable people." At that age, you don't quite know what he meant, and it's been a really good life lesson, right? We're all replaceable. No matter what happens, no matter how good we are, patients are going to continue to show up at the hospital the next day after I leave, and industry will move on, and the world will move on, and life will move on. That has just always stuck with me.
All right, so you go on, you leave Dairy Queen and the restaurant business, and you go off to college. Did you
Mhm.
know when you left for school that you were interested in healthcare?
No idea. I moved from Springfield down to Southwest Missouri State at the time. It's Missouri State University now. Jumped in as a freshman, general education, just zero idea on what I wanted to do.
So then what led you to it?
Yeah, it's a difficult story. It's two-part in that, again, I think you can already tell that I obviously had a great relationship with my dad, and this is just a great guy. I went home at week 8. I would drive back to St. Louis every weekend and work. On a Sunday morning, I was getting ready to go back to college, and my dad said, "Hey, would you mind dropping me off at the ER on your way out of town?" Red flags all over the place because
Yeah.
he was a classic, this was in the 80s, and classic guy of the 80s, never did preventative care. He was now a couple of years post-divorce, wasn't taking care of himself, smoker, not a great diet, etc. Untreated hypertension, as I think back now, brought him to the ER and, of course, decided to stay as opposed to
Mm.
just going on and driving 4 hours away from him. That day just kept deteriorating and just got worse, and he died that night. Just obviously very shocking. I was there all by myself all day long, which is weird because I've got two brothers, and of course, even though my parents were divorced, my mom was still there in St. Louis, but everyone was just scattered and couldn't get there for various reasons, and died of a dissecting aortic aneurysm. That was obviously a very pivotal point. That experience, again, sitting in first the ER waiting room all day long, and
Yeah.
then when he moved to surgery, it was a Sunday evening, right? And so not a lot of surgeries going on. So I was the only one in this kind of cold, dimly lit surgery waiting room, realizing obviously that things were very serious at this point. And all of a sudden the door would open. This nurse would come out and just give me updates and tell me how he's doing. It wasn't horrible at first. It was just technical and generic updates. And this would happen every 30 minutes or so. Dissecting aneurysm is a really long surgery. So she just kept coming out. And as I know that now, that's a big deal to break scrub, to go out,
Mm-hmm.
talk to somebody, go back in, scrub back in. And, I'm sure they had a weekend staff, so they didn't have a lot of excess staff. But it was just a very interesting feeling in that every time she came out, the news got progressively worse. And yet she was very comforting. It sounds weird that I wanted to see her more because the
Mm-hmm.
news was getting worse, but obviously I needed the support, needed the comfort as I was in shock, as you would be. That was the interesting moment. And that was not a moment, of course, that I said, "Oh, I want to do this and I love healthcare." No
Right.
connection in the moment. But then the series of events that played out, my brother and his wife, 10 years older, and they were living in Springfield, Missouri, where I was going to school. I moved out of the dorm and into their house to save money. Ironically, my sister-in-law was a nurse already, and my brother had a degree that wasn't yielding much great work. Men going into nursing school was starting to be a little bit of a thing there, so he was in nursing school when I moved in with them. I always look back and I am so appreciative of their now pseudo-parenting,
Yeah.
this kid who's lost. I always just say that I feel their arms on my shoulders just pointing me to it. And by that next fall, I was in nursing school. Yeah, just a very
Wow.
interesting series of events. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I know that was so many years ago, but how impactful. And through your grief, what an incredible silver lining
Yeah.
to have pointed you in the direction of making a difference in the lives of others. Because I sure hate that you haven't had your father all these years, but I think of all the lives you've saved as a result and part of that experience. Thank you for sharing that. That's wow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks for the kind words.
Okay, so you went to nursing school and you
Yeah.
graduated
Didn't
and
graduate.
you graduated. That's
Woohoo.
fantastic. I'm not surprised. And you became a critical care nurse. Talk about some of those early jobs.
Yeah, so I started in adult cardiac intensive care at the ripe old age of 21. The only thing I did not like about that job is that it was night shift. Some
Mm.
people get really into nights, they're fine. About 4 a.m. every morning, I just got nauseous. My body was just like, "What are you doing up?" And I could barely drive home at 7. People would say, "Yeah, I slept 4 or 5 hours today." I would sleep from 7:30 until 6 p.m. and then get up and do it again because I was just zonked.
Oh, a zombie. My goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were a critical care nurse, but then you didn't you work for Lifelight as well?
I did. I remember looking out the break room window of that ICU at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and seeing the helicopter land and seeing them running out to the ER. And I just thought, wow, that sounds fascinating. So I started taking a bunch of different type of courses. And these are like 2-3 day weekend courses on trauma, on pediatrics, on a lot of things to round out my skills. Well, I worked in that ICU for 3 years and then got the flight job. It was a great honor actually to get selected. I loved that job. It was really challenging in so many ways. It was when I worked in the ICU and you had a patient deteriorate, we literally had a big blue button that was for code blue, and you hit it and 15 people showed up. And I remember thinking a couple of months into the job, I was looking for the blue button, like, this patient is really sick and it's just me and a paramedic. And so you just, your assessment skills are refined. You treat a much broader patient population. I loved every minute of that job. I think I did that about 6 years.
What did you learn about yourself during those 6 years in that job?
Trust your gut and trust your training, trust your skills, maintain calm composure. So I think it was that narrowing of that focus in, okay, let's assess, diagnose, treat, and get going. And by the way, scene time was 10 minutes or less. So you move very quickly in that because the golden hour of trauma is a real thing. And I think back to the trust your gut, I've always called it a nurse's sixth sense in terms of there's just something there sometimes when you're watching a patient all night long in an ICU and you're just something doesn't feel right. Inevitably, something does end up deteriorating and presenting itself finally on a monitor or on a more objective criteria. But there was a pivotal moment I just recall saying, I'm going to trust my gut from now on because, it feels the majority of the time, if not all the time, I've been right in my assessment. And so that obviously, it's a good point in your career when you gain that confidence in your own assessment skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you spend the first decade or so of your career in healthcare as a frontline nurse and a clinician. Take me through then the decision and the transition from clinical care to administrative leadership.
Yeah, I became almost overnight chief flight nurse for that program. So again, back to the sixth grade guitar class, I'm starting to see a trend here. I had a bunch of peers, and then within a week, I was in charge of them. And that all came as a series of events that the prior chief flight nurse left. It was a very quick process of essentially appointing me as opposed to interview process, et cetera. So I became the leader of that program. And it was really eye-opening for me to sit with Dr. Banach, Shane Banach was his name. We would take case reviews, bring them up to the 30,000-foot level, look across all of them, do some clinical studies, look out at the literature, et cetera, and say, you know what? It's time to change this medication out for head trauma patients. And so just changing that protocol in a collaborative way with an excellent physician colleague, it's like, okay, I've been hopefully taking really good care of the 3 or 4 or 5 patients I fly every day. Now that one move is going to impact our entire flight program and all the patients we flew. And that was my aha moment that leadership could be done on a much broader scale. I could impact more people through leadership than I could as a singular focused, here's my patients, I clock out, I go home. Yeah, that was really the moment that I said, okay, I love this. And that was the moment I decided I needed to go back and round out my skills, go back to school, et cetera.
So from chief flight nurse, what was your first administrative role?
Yeah, I was in a big Fort Springfield, Missouri, 900-bed trauma center, and we would fly out to a lot of regional hospitals and pick up patients, obviously a variety of presentations in terms of the care that was administered. And there was one facility that really stood out in a great way. Every time we flew there, the patient was what we called packaged well. They had the right meds going, they had the right assessment. And so I felt a lot of quality in this organization. I could live in Springfield and work out there. So that was appealing to me. And in terms of, I think I can move up quicker in a healthcare career by moving to a smaller facility. Because at that time, nurses weren't in the C-suite. And so I decided to go down that track. Citizens Memorial Hospital in Bolivar, Missouri, became the director of their ER, which was a 5-bed ER. So it was completely different than anything I'd done, and yet incredibly formative. Had all kinds of things to learn because you wear a lot of different hats in a rural hospital. Just had a lot of great opportunities there.
Fantastic. And then from there, you moved to the Mercy Health System, right? And your first gig as a CEO.
Yeah, so I worked at CMH Citizens Memorial for about 11 years and progressed up to chief operating officer of that organization. And although it was a regional kind of rural hospital, it had 74 beds, but we had over 500 long-term care beds through our network. We learned a lot about that as well. But I was doing what people do sometimes. I was hanging out waiting for the CEO to retire. And he wasn't going anywhere. So I started looking around at that point, and that's when I was afforded the opportunity to move over to Mercy. I had gone to nursing school at a Mercy hospital, so it felt like coming home in some ways, and it was all still in the same geographic area. So yeah, that was my first CEO job.
And what surprised you about the role of CEO?
I think the most surprising part of it was how little time I could spend in the hospital with the caregivers and the team. So this was Lebanon, Missouri, which was a kind of an industrial town of about 11,000 people, and how important it was to be at every civic club, Rotary Club, and just presenting. You're a key leader in that community. I was a little taken aback by that because I had stuff to do at the hospital, and yet community's pulling on you in great ways. And it was a fantastic opportunity as well. Great people in that community. I had a lot of fun. I was only there 3 years, but it was a great role.
And that's a balance that so many CEOs, but particularly health system CEOs, have to strike, right? Is that kind of external facing role where you are a face for oftentimes the largest employer in town, right? And also, you're leading a huge clinical staff and employees and others, volunteers that actually make your organization work. It's a hard balance that so many of our clients have to strike. What's your sort of secret to having figured that out over the years?
Yeah, that's a great catch because it is a hard balance. And it's interesting. Once you get in much larger metropolitan areas, it becomes far less important. I think it's governing the best you can in terms of trying to figure out the best use of your time and not getting pulled too far, the minutia maybe of various community agencies, but still being very representative. And simultaneously, while you are out doing all that, you got to have a great team back at the ranch, right? Doing the work. And so I think building up your leadership team, helping them see that you're not out just going to lunch every day. It's significant work to build the relationship, the reputation of the hospital, building that confidence that you can be out in the community because you know and trust the people that are leading in your absence.
So fast forward for me, you're at Mercy in an administrative leadership role for, I think, a couple of different Mercy communities. And then you make the decision to relocate to Oklahoma, to Integris, which is a huge system across the state of Oklahoma. And then on to Presbyterian, of course, in New Mexico. Take me through what led you to make these big moves, big geographic moves, as well as health system leadership moves.
As I now mentor new leaders, I talk a lot about that, your willingness and your ability and your desire, and sometimes the need to move to another state, to another system, whatever that might be. With Integris, I was really excited about. I'd run a flagship hospital, so I felt comfortable with that. I think I have med staff relations down. I've worked with boards. I've got a lot of the key tenets of what we do. But there was this huge transplant center there, which would typically both be aligned usually with an academic center. And they had just had some early leadership to develop both of those programs. I think in terms of the big moves, it can be very hard on your family, of course. And so I've always done a check-in first and foremost to Nancy, my wife. Hey, this is an opportunity I got contacted about. What do you think? And 9 times out of 10, it's yes, let's go explore it. Absolutely. There was one really, really small community that would have started me out as a CEO sooner than I did by about a whopping 3 or 4 months. But we drove through this town and she wouldn't look at me. She was looking out the car window. I could just tell she was not thrilled with the environment at all. Finally, I pulled her cheek over and a little tear coming down her cheek. And she just said, "There's not even a Walmart here."
Oh,
And so I turned the job down. You got to have that
yeah.
support. It obviously worked out okay.
All right. And so then the final move from Integris was to Presbyterian, of course, in New Mexico. What drew you to that opportunity and to that organization?
It was really all about being a payer provider system to see how a payer and a provider can come together for value-based care arrangements really was the impetus for that drive. This is such a poor state with so many needs. That was really appealing to me to see how you can deliver care at a lower cost and that it's not all about fee for service, which is all I knew through my whole career. Really coordinating as much as we can. Of course, there's a firewall between the two of us into the delivery system and the health plan in terms of rates, of course, but
Yeah.
everything else is fantastic to work together, again, for the member on the health plan side and the patient on the delivery system sides.
Wow, you have such a pattern in your life and in your career. It's like equal parts, how can I make a bigger impact and how can I learn something new? Every move
Yeah.
you've made, you are like a lifetime learner.
Yes, thank you. I never really heard that called out like that. So it helps affirm because I always say if I would have sat down at age 21, I would have never sculpted out right this path. I've been, again, very blessed, very fortunate to get these opportunities. And I always have felt like I am a lifetime learner. I've really sought some of that out intentionally too. So
Yeah. As you look back, what is, if you had to pick one, what's the career accomplishment that you're most proud of?
I think it's, I do create really good teams that come with me, and I don't necessarily mean to the jobs, but we just have this group. We've got this group from when I worked at Mercy. We've got this group when I worked at Integris that we travel together. We make a strong desired connection to get together at least once a year somewhere and do
Yeah.
something. And so the building of that teams, because we do so much hard work together that you just can't help go through what some of these hard moments are in your life and not find this common bond that has you all there in that moment that doesn't transfer on through the rest of your life. So I always consider that we pick up lifelong friends from each place, and it's fantastic.
Traveling companions.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
speaks really well of you as a leader and also as just a human. And you're a lot of fun to be around, so there's that too. Let's talk the flip side. Let's talk mistakes. All, I think, really good, authentic, self-aware leaders are willing to talk about and learn from their mistakes. Do you remember one that kind of shook you and shaped you?
One that really sticks out because it really did shake me. And it was a young leader at Citizens Memorial Hospital. I was over radiology and surprise, I don't know how to take x-rays, don't know anything about a CAT scanner, et cetera. But suddenly you've got other disciplines reporting to you. And this is going to sound horrible, but we had actually the radioactive material for nuclear medicine delivered. It's in a hot lab process, obviously highly regulated, highly controlled. And it was left on our back dock for an entire weekend. It was shocking. Obviously, it wasn't in my daily standard work to see if it
Right.
made it into the hot lab appropriately and all that. But I was responsible for that leader. I was responsible for that department. And it came with ramifications. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission came in. If you please don't, but if you go look it up, I think I'm still documented in there as someone who made a mistake with radioactive
Wow.
material. The organization had to formally reprimand me, which I've never had in my career and never had since. It really woke me up and, like you said, shook me. And nobody was hurt or anything like that, but certainly could have been, right? It just really made me get a lot more attentive to the departments that were reporting to me, to their processes, to their barriers, and to where the, no pun intended, where the hot spots are, right?
Right.
Like, how can I remove obstacles or barriers to make your job easier? So that was the learning, to not just take something at face value just because it's on an org chart, but to really dig in and to understand their work as well.
Yeah.
So that was a big one.
That is a big one. That's pretty consequential.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you talked some about your family, of course. You've had a fast-paced career that you've certainly excelled in and have taken so seriously. You have a family you adore. I know you are so active in charitable organizations and others. We all, as leaders, have multiple dimensions of our lives. How do you balance those?
Yeah, not well. I want to have an incredible answer that says I do all these wonderful things in equal balance. And obviously, there's so much focus on provider well-being, all of our caregivers and so forth. Executives, I don't think we talk about it near as much. So I work hard and I've always enjoyed that. I feel like I'm always on. I can disconnect, like when I'm on vacation or whatever, but when I'm in town at work, I'm on a lot. I think back to some earlier comments, the way I've done that is to have the supportive family. Nancy's in this as much as I am. We call her, whether it's an honorary nurse sometimes or honorary administrator. We do a lot of entertaining that's related to my job, but she loves that and I love that. I do pay a lot of attention, more so in the last decade probably, to my health than I did earlier. I became a runner like you. I did my one and done marathon in Chicago. And I did that for about 10 or 12 years and then started having some back issues. So, I just moved into strength training and I do wake up every morning and go to the gym. It's so early in the morning that it doesn't really interfere with anything else. That's an incredible break for me and to focus on health, right? And this is what we do. And I think we have to be good examples, right, on how to balance that. In terms of mental health, I do get so much from my family, my kids, my wife, my grandkids now. I have a spiritual side as well. I have a strong faith that helps put things in the right perspective for me. And then travel. So it's been very interesting. I've decided that I enjoy planning trips as much as I enjoy being on trips. And so I've always got some trip out there brewing. Those are kind of the rounding out experiences for me. But as I get closer to thinking about what retirement would look like, I cannot answer that question for the life of me. So we're going to have to figure something else out. I'm not a golfer and I'm not a hunter, as you heard earlier.
I was going to say, you could go back to trying hunting. I don't know.
I might. Maybe I'll be good. And we'll see.
All right, shifting gears back to observations of leadership. You have had such an incredible, successful career, and through that have been exposed to all sorts of different kinds of leaders. You talked about earlier, you learn as much from those who are maybe not the best leaders or most motivating leaders as you do from those who really truly inspire and get the best of others. I'm curious, if you had to boil it down to, say, 3 characteristics of the most effective leaders, what would those be?
That's a great question. I think humble stands out immediately, because it's not about us. It really isn't. And I think the sooner you learn that, the better in your career. It's our jobs to coalesce and bring everybody along, send the message, create the vision, whatever it might be, but it's not you, right? It's us. Healthcare is a team sport. Secondly, I would add probably transparency, because I don't know if this is unique to healthcare, but there's just some people are just suspicious by nature. And if you're not, again, communicating, over communicating, and telling your teams and whoever else in your organization everything you can possibly tell them at the time. And as you well know, in the field of work that you do, sometimes you can't tell them quite everything, right? But being as absolutely transparent as you can be. And then lastly, a leader who just simply follows up and has that closed loop communication style, even if it's not the answer the person wanted to hear, but they're not just forgotten. And so I set all kinds of alerts and reminders and the hundreds of emails I get every day and flag them in different ways and to follow up with Dr. So-and-so the next day. So I think closing that loop for people who are depending on you and they're waiting on an answer on something.
So humble, transparent, and follow through. I think you just described yourself as a leader, Tim Johnsen.
I miss some of those closed loop communications. Then I see the person, I cringe.
That's all right.
But being transparent and humble, I just own it.
There you go. So, okay, are there any aspects of your leadership that you're working on? Like any Achilles heels?
I think and this has always surprised me, frankly, because I thought I would have solved this by now. But if I've got a crucial conversation to have or course correct someone in their behavior or their work or whatever that might be, I let that go on a little bit too long sometimes. And I've seen it modeled beautifully where I've had colleagues that as soon as they hear it, they address it, but the longer you let it build up, the problem can get bigger. And I've learned that the hard way. So it is something I'm always working on. I'm very cognizant of, and I've tried different things to make sure that within X number of days, I sit down with that person and have that conversation or whatever it might be, because that is just a weakness of mine. I mean, I worry about people who love crucial conversations, right?
Right.
So I don't love them, but they're a necessary part of the role. And a lot of times it is just a little bit of a turn or a little bit of a twist in their performance that they need, but it's still hard to talk to them about it for me.
Well, I think you're not alone. I think a lot of leaders struggle with that. We have a value here at Girard. It's called the kind truth, because we all benefit, right, from the kind truth, and clear is kind.
Yeah, I like that. I like that term. I'm going to write that down and have that on my computer. So with the next time that opportunity presents, I'm going to think of this. So thank you.
There you go. Absolutely. Okay, Tim, you've been very generous with your experience and your perspectives, and we're now going to move into what we call lightning round, which is a series of go with your gut, answers to questions and either ors. Don't overthink it. Are you ready?
Sure. I'm absolutely ready. Let's go.
Okay, here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You're a huge traveler.
Yep.
What is your favorite place to visit in the United States and outside of the United States?
Favorite place to visit in the U.S. used to be New York City, and then we overdid it. So now I would say more nature. So whether it's national parks, somewhere green, and then you said outside of the U.S.? Mm-hmm. I don't think I can beat Africa. I've been there twice, different countries within Africa, and I absolutely have fallen in love with those sweet children. It's just amazing. There's such a connection for me for some reason with those little kiddos, and in several different countries in Africa. And so despite whatever adventure we were on or safari or climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with my son, it was the people that I loved there.
Okay, the last time you tried something new.
I'm trying to think of the name of it. Pilates. Oh my gosh. I do all this working out. I've done spin class. I've done this. I've done that. I did Pilates and I about died. I literally about died. I felt stupid. It looks like a torture chamber. It's miserable. I'll never go back.
Oh, man. All right. The book that you are reading right now.
Interesting. Maybe my children got it for me, but it's called Die with Zero. This guy has really done a nice job of kind of charting out all these statistical analyses of how we spend through life. And his thinking is that if you're going to give charitably or give to your children or whatever it might be, do so when you can earlier. So that's my current book. And again, probably sent to me by one of my children.
Mm-hmm. I think they're sending you a message.
Yeah,
Not so
exactly.
subtle. Not so
Yeah.
subtle. Okay. Best book you've read on leadership.
Oh, gosh. Again, I feel so dated when I say this, but it's true. It's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey. There's so many things that you can pick up that book that's, 40 years old now. And
Yeah.
it always resonates with me. Every time I read it, reread it, and I'll just read a chapter or something or one of the habits.
What time do you wake up and how do you start your day?
I wake up at 5:15. I don't hit the snooze alarm because I've got to start getting everything ready to get to the gym by 6.
All right. If you could pick a different career, what would it have been?
I really do, and I always tease everyone I work with about this, but I really do enjoy public relations, marketing, how to attract consumers and think about all of that. And of course, I've only experienced it in the healthcare realm, and I've learned a lot from you and your team on how you do that, and even some of the crisis communication stuff. I think that's very fascinating to me. And then I always follow that up immediately with, yes, I know every administrator thinks they're great at marketing. And I'm not, but I think it'd be something along those lines. Because I don't know if you picked up on this, but I'm a people person. So I like that connection a lot.
You are, and it is never too late, Tim.
Maybe.
All right. We have come to the end of lightning round, and I always end with the question that reporters love to ask at the end of an interview, which is there anything more that you'd like to share?
Yes. I think we need to do a much better job as an industry re-attracting or attracting middle schoolers, high schoolers, people who are thinking about a second career back into healthcare. I think the healthcare pipeline has burst. I worry a lot about that. So I just encourage people to think about healthcare, even if they're not driven clinically. There's so many opportunities in and around healthcare, right? That serve our communities beautifully. You can reinvent yourself in healthcare a lot of times. So I just think that we need to do a far better job at attracting people to this field, because despite how hard things can be and the challenges that we face, it's so incredibly rewarding. It's fun. I've loved every minute of this career. And so I would just shout that from the rooftops every day.
That's a good one to end on. Tim, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your backstory and your experience with me and with us. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our longtime friendship.
Absolutely. And right back at you. You've been phenomenal to me throughout my career. And again, I really am very humbled and honored to be a guest on this. So thank you so much.